Live here with Keith Gerson, who is the president of FranConnect, and we just wrapped up the FranConnect CEO Summit here in Palm Beach. Keith, before we get into the Franchise Sales Index, which is what we're really talking about today, why don't you give us an overview of what just happened over the last few days with CEOs and franchising?
Sure. So every single year, FranConnect puts on a franchise growth circle for its customers, for FranConnect's customers. And this was a group consisting of approximately 40 franchisors and a handful of suppliers. It was by invitation only, in which we were able to kind of limit the amount of overlap of competitors so people could really speak openly in a way about growth and the challenges that they experience in a way that they normally can't. It's kind of unique. We require everybody to complete a confidentiality agreement, but they also complete a confidential business assessment, which we're able to aggregate and therefore really kind of have a growth group where each of your fellow participants are mentors for all intents and purposes. We love doing it.
That's great. So obviously franchise sales is going to, this is going to be years to come. It's always going to be a focus of these things because without growth, then franchisors are going to die. And you actually addressed this yesterday in brands that had significant unit count and then decreased, probably because they were the failure to innovate. And innovation was a part of this. Maybe the report that you've put out is somewhat innovative in itself. Why don't you give a little bit of background on the report and also tell our audience how we can find it. We'll make sure the URL pops up on the screen, but give
Sure.
us some
And I want to give credit to No Limit in 1851 because it was actually Sean Fitzgerald of 1851 who started talking to me about the fact that we had all of this terrific data and why didn't we leverage it. And we talked about that, and it was probably a good 6 months in the making before we actually got to the point that we could produce this. The report was based on 487 different franchise brands. It was anonymized, aggregated. It was broken down by the size of the systems, the industries that they were in, so you could slice it and dice it any which way. And we broke it down into a number of classifications, starting with the actual lead generation, the top of the pipeline, if you will, and take it all the way through lead nurturing and campaigning, et cetera. And the results are nothing short of spectacular and staggering as well.
So this is a tool that hasn't existed in the past, and obviously you're mining a wealth of client data to come up with. Here are at least some of the basics that you need to understand. Most franchisors, when they say, here's the number I'm going to throw up, I want 40 deals next year,
right?
It's fine. Typically that's not backed by data. So let's take that case where CEO says, I want 40 deals next year. It would be hard to create a marketing strategy without being able to mine through data for what, at least from a competitive landscape, what the other brands are doing. How did you take that into account when you're putting together some of this data, and how valuable should this be to the franchise marketing process?
Well, it's completely invaluable, and in fact, going through this, I want to start by separating this report from other reports that exist. Every other report heretofore has been somewhat anecdotal and self-reported information, and what's really highly differentiated here, this is based on the actual data coming from nearly 700,000 leads that are passing through our system, and we have the ability to be able to track it through our technologies all the way through the sales process. But of course, it's only as good as the records that people keep. So what we learned that came out of the report is just as every bit as valuable as what we couldn't find from the report. That's very telling in and of itself. So you mentioned, for example, marketing, and there's a definite disconnect that we're discovering in which the marketing departments, which are most typically funded by franchisees making contributions to marketing funds, are typically a separation of church and state, cannot be integrated with the franchise sales effort. And so for whatever reason, you find most marketing resources are just the consumer-facing efforts and not really focused on providing all of the help and support to the franchisor. Hopefully this is going to be very helpful to marketers in particular when we start talking about lead generation and top of the funnel, because now you got the ability to be able to really draw in here and say, well, based on my industry and based on my system size, which really are the best sources of leads that become and beyond leads themselves, that becomes sales. More importantly, yeah.
One thing that you're talking about when we were just in with all the CEOs is obviously, no one's going to be surprised by this, that referrals are always going to be the easiest leads to close. Someone who's got a relationship with the business or has been told, you have to look at this business. So they're coming in where they're emotionally already hooked. But some of the traditional things like portals or brokers or trade shows, which have been part of the mix of franchise marketing forever, are still relevant in some cases, and I think what's interesting about this, and whether a portal or a broker is the right answer for a brand, that's going to be dependent on the brand, but still this is showing that a little bit of everything is still going to give you your best shot to achieve the sales goals.
There's no question about that. I've been saying all along, every single one of these methodologies are all valid mediums for different folks at different times in their business, and even for the same folks based on market conditions and different fluctuations that are happening. These are just and should be considered tools in the toolbox. And no one is more valid or less valid than the other. Every single one of these, though, has to be accompanied by a very specific strategy in terms of where, how, and when you use this. And, we mentioned, for example, that, portals are prolific in terms of generating leads, but as a percentage of closing effectiveness rates, along with trade shows, they come in at only 0.6%. However, what we wanted to do within the Franchise Sales Index report was also to delve in and make a study of what the best practices are. What are the folks out there that are really just banging the boards and doing a great job of closing trade shows, deals, and portals? What are they doing differently from everybody else that helps them be able to over-index?
Yeah.
So that's a great takeaway there.
So from our side on No Limit Agency side, it's interesting. We could advise do all of this stuff, and if we're organizing the budget and saying, look, as communicators or marketers, spend a little bit in each of the channels, it's going to set you up for the best source of success. Which this dictates that. But you having been on the sales side, there are other variables that sometimes fall into it, like validation. Validation could kill everything that's in this report. So even though this gives a baseline, I think that question, it's here, it's at every conference that I go to. The question is, well, what's working in franchise development? And there's no singular answer, that it's a combination of everything. So maybe talk about how this gives you a baseline, but it's not going to be foolproof.
Well, that's right, and I think that's when we start going into managing the actual funnel. That what we're seeing is a lot of people would identify that the biggest challenge today is lead generation, and that's not what I'm finding. I think we can always argue that quality of leads, that's always going to be a point of consideration. There's no shortage of leads. I mentioned we almost had 700,000 leads pass through our database for 487 brands. That's a whole lot of leads. But what we're finding from the data, from the statistics, is that what happens when those leads come in, you look at the disproportionate amount of leads that never receive a return telephone call, it's shocking. It's in excess of 52%. You look at the amount of leads that not only didn't receive a telephone call, but didn't receive email other than auto-campaigning perhaps, did not receive or have any tasks set against it, is, I believe, 38%. A lot of times we're damning the source. Portals don't work, trade shows don't work, etc. The fact is we're not working. Yeah. There's a problem with the execution, and it comes through loud and clear when we're looking at this. And so our commitment is not just to have the data, but what's the point of data if you can't, make it actionable? Yeah. And that's part of what we were doing here today, is making sure that we were bringing this information out and educating CEOs and COOs on the data and where and how they can improve their closing effectiveness rate.
So IFA talks about perception challenges that exist in the general public. The good news about what franchise sales has done, which I don't know that it gets complete credit for it, is it at least educating a baseline of users. 700,000 leads, that means there's 700,000 people that at least got a little bit more familiarized with what franchising is. So now comes the challenge, exactly what you said. If we're not calling them back, if we're not spending the right time facilitating and nurturing those leads, then maybe the next gap that's going to have to be filled is is what is the role of the salesperson in these deals, and are they being effective for your brand? I can say, historically in our company, we can look at the same data point. We might get the same amount of leads that we got a year ago, but depending on who's nurturing those leads, sometimes we close less, sometimes we close more, depending on who the salesperson is. So even though this starts giving you the data and can actually start diving into the humans that you have facilitating the lead generation process, they're still franchise sales is never going to be as easy as A plus B equals C.
Mm-hmm. Well, I completely agree with that. I think, and I'm going to be a little provocative when I say this, we have to recognize that failing 99% of the time is not an acceptable standard of performance. What I'm referring to is almost in any report you look at, self-reported, anecdotal, or even data-driven, we still find it's an unacceptable level. It's, our report is showing that it's a 1.2% closing effectiveness rate off of 100 leads. But yet we have brands that are utilizing our technologies, but they're executing it in a spectacular way where they're closing 2%, 3%, 4%, even we have some brands that are closing 5% of the deals that they get in. They have become experts at their craft, and there's no tolerance for a 1% closing effectiveness rate. So they're basically, our whole conference here, the theme was the art of disruption. And one of the big things to disrupt is the status quo. And that's what I hope that this report does, is just as becomes a jarring wake-up call, and that it breaks it down so at least people can intelligently say, that the end result is the lagging indicator, but the leading indicators are going to be, for example, how many drips, attempted contacts, how many thoughtful campaigns were developed based on where somebody is at in the sales process. So could you imagine? I mean, we're seeing that the only time that there's any campaigning, automated campaigning, is typically a new lead status. One of, unfortunately, 10, 12, 15 steps in a process, which is far too many. Right. Best practice is going to be perhaps 6 to 8 steps in the sales process. But even when we're looking at those and say that somebody gets at the FDD review stage or somebody gets at validation, guess what? No campaigns. But how simple it would be to remedy by simply having people videotaped even on their smartphones, and to be able to upload those into a conscientious and targeted campaign based on when somebody moves into that stage of the sales process. Yeah. Validation, here's some great videos that are franchisees validating the value that they get from being part of your system.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is where sales historically in franchising, and call it the consultant's fault, call it the salespeople's fault, but it was really one size fits all. Like best practice was best practice, sure. And the reality is I think the movement that's happening with leads, and you can hear it in some of the strategies that people are putting in place, is that maybe I don't want a phone call right now. Maybe I'm not ready to buy for 6 months. Maybe I want a text message. Maybe I just want email. Send me information. So the buyer is now saying, wait a second, I'm not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and it's creating this friction because sales teams are still like, no, I'm going to call you 7,000 times. Well, when you call me for the 7,000th time, now I'm getting annoyed by you. Now your brand annoys me and you feel desperate. So I think what's interesting, the way that technology is going to start shaping the way that the prospect works, is we're going to start asking questions and pre-qualifying them through the lead process so that we're doing all this stuff right. We got 700,000 people that are interested in buying franchises. Great. We have a great pool of people. Not all of them are going to buy, even at 1%. That's okay. From probably 1/10 of the amount of franchise brands that are out there. That's good. But we're going to have to start treating the prospects slightly different to understand what do they want and how do we facilitate that conversation, not how do we sell them and why you have to buy this brand.
Yes. Well, I completely agree with that. We have to be more strategic, and the technology is and has caught up to it. So when it comes to our technology, for example, we've created workflows now, and the workflows will allow franchisors to be able to say that when somebody goes to a specific stage in the sales process, that they're going to get X amount of email campaigns, but at different points in day parts. Then it's to be followed with a newsletter, a digital newsletter. Then it's to be followed with maybe 1 or 2 email drip campaigns. But it's intelligent, it's targeted discussions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very frustrating to think that I'm going to be putting myself in the hands of somebody who has non-relevant communications or non-existent communications based on sales process. What am I going to learn from that company when I'm part of the reason I'm signing that franchise agreement is hopefully to work with somebody that executes at a high level and recognizes and has access to better marketing technologies that allow me to communicate on a timely basis. No more, no less than when you need, and perhaps when, it's even when you break a purchase cycle. And by purchase cycle in franchise sales, that might be even just showing up for a very specific call. And if somebody misses it, being able to have a targeted communication that is basically now specific to what's occurred behaviorally. If somebody's keeping all of their appointments times, then there's no need to continue to drip on them.
I think we fail as an industry in sales because we think that we're selling a widget. At the end of the day, I would love for someone to tell me something that's harder to sell than a franchise. You're asking someone to quit regular, whatever regular, that's a job, that's whatever steady is.
Sure.
You're asking them to invest their life savings, especially newbie franchisees, specifically newbie franchisees. You're asking them to take a risk with a brand, sometimes with an emerging brand that has no brand awareness. And yet, when we look at sales, the sales training that goes towards sales folks is sales. We're not selling cars here. We're facilitating the biggest change that will ever happen in these folks' lives. And I think that's where data, looking at data and understanding that there's a lot of gaps. If there's 99 people saying no, then that's not good. Why, right?
Well, that's right. And, this report is incredibly useful, but let's face it, there's a combination of science, but there's also that art. And the fact is that this is just going to help good people be great. Okay, if you have people that cannot effectively communicate, emotionally connect with their prospect, etc., you can have all of the right processes. It's all being squandered. I think if anything, that this is just going to basically help people, help their team do better jobs. But let's face it, again, the technology is not going to help. You can have the greatest technologies in the world. It's like, a horse race. You could be the best jockey in the world. If you're on a broken down horse, you're not going to win, and conversely. So hopefully this is going to open up a new dialogue. Hopefully, again, this is going to challenge, as I said, the status quo, give the means for the franchise VPs, directors, managers, heads of marketing, etc., to have intelligent conversations with their team, but also to marry up the marketing with the sales process. Because that's the one big disconnect that exists right now, and it shows because you now have franchise development people who are not professional marketers, that are not professional content developers, and we need to create integrated marketing tools for our sales team to be more enabled. And that's why I want to see this hopefully help people make better decisions on not only where and how they're going to be spending their money, but also thinking about where and how to develop those intelligent campaigns and messaging to people that's going to go ahead and address lifestyle, the reason that the person came to you initially, or their desires as it relates to build income, equity, whatever it might be that their personal drivers are.
And portals are still part of the report, and who knows what the life cycle of a portal is. We could be at the end of it. We could re-engage with the portals. I don't know. But what's interesting about the portals that I think I'm seeing here in the data is what the portals did is it unified the sales process for many brands that were interested in growing to pool funds for PPC and whatever else had happened from a search standpoint to grab someone who raised their hand, novice franchisee, I'm interested, pull them into a zone and have some sort of communication on what franchising is. Brokers then, when this started getting a little shaky or the expectations of the sales guys weren't met, brokers stepped in. Now they're facilitating conversations. They're pulling a whole bunch of people together, brands and prospects, and facilitating conversation around what franchising is. I think what this is showing is at some point, whether that's done through an IFA or it's done through another organization, the unification of as many brands as possible that says, I'm interested in growing in Dallas, or I'm interested in growing in Chicago, pooling those financial resources to educate buyers, educate the community of what franchising is. that could be the direction this goes, because the portals did do that, the brokers did do that, and those are the still two things that trade shows did it too.
Sure.
But we work in so siloed areas. No, my leads are my leads. Wrong, because there's 99 of them that are going to say no and go somewhere else.
That's
so
right.
what happens if we start working together as an industry on lead gen and franchise awareness?
Yep. No, I completely agree with you. And I want to set one comment that we made straight a little bit, because when we say we had 700,000 leads pass through our system, recognize with portals in many cases until just recently, that portal lead may have been distributed to 3, 5, 10 other brands.
Right.
And so it gets counted as an individual discrete lead.
Right, so the number comes down. Top number comes down, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize, which is why I also like talking about speed to the lead, that we've got, undeniable facts that we've pulled directly out of the data that showed that those that are responding to leads in 4 hours or less are represented 56% of the deals that got closed. And then the next block, which was 4 hours to 1 day, dropped from that 56% to 17%, all the way down to those that took a week or longer to respond. If they were getting deals, it was at 11%. But that means that you had a 5x differential. Yeah. Or greater in terms of the difference between those that got responded to. So hopefully, again, this is going to stimulate good conversations, good reviews, and hopefully lines that are drawn in the sand that basically say that this is not a negotiable. That for you as a franchise salesperson, it's not your prerogative when I'm having to pay on average $150 per lead to simply choose not to get back to somebody in 30 minutes or less, which is the gold standard. Because the fact is that lead is just not going away. That lead is going to go ahead and now engage with one of the other brands that they already had been distributed to by those portals.
That's great. Yeah, I think what you just left it as this is to start facilitating the conversation around change is necessary, right. And let's try to put money where we know things are going to work. And if this starts that dialogue, fantastic. Keith, where can anybody that's watching this, where can they find the index?
By going on the internet to franchisesalesindex.com. I don't know if your viewers can see the IFA logo on here.
Should be able to see it. Yeah, I can see it.
I mentioned specifically the fact that this logo is here is we worked in concert with the IFA. They've been a good company to work with, a good association to work with, because they also give us a good vehicle. We've developed training content around this. So I've got an 8-hour workshop that's based on this information. But I want to make it very clear that anybody who purchases the report, and it's a very reasonably priced report, but 100% of that revenue, 100% of it goes to the IFA and to the Franchise Education and Research Foundation. None of it comes to FranConnect. This is a labor of love, and hopefully something that we can also do for our customers to help them be able to get to that 2, 3, 4, 5% closing effectiveness rate.
And I would imagine this continues the conversation into the next FranConnect event as well.
Well, that's right. And actually, I've got a webinar coming up on November 30th. We had such terrific demand on the one on November 3rd. Contact FranConnect because we went ahead and videotaped and archived it, but we had over 500 registrants at our last webinar on November 3rd. So the next one is on November 30th. Stay tuned. We'll make sure that we're sending out broad invitations to your viewers and others on where and how to participate in that event.
That's great. We really appreciate the information.
My pleasure.
Keith Gerson, Nick Powills. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.